Excellent. We are now live. Let me get people to join. All right. Hello, everyone. I was spending a couple of seconds trying to send out some invites. Got a number of people coming in. I am going to start things off with somebody you guys, our friend from the Psychedelic Society of San Francisco, Seth Werner.
Hey guys, yo Ian, great to see you, man. I'm so glad you're up here. So glad you're doing this. Thanks a lot for joining the squad and just making some cool ideas and content available.
Yeah.
I just wanted to come in here hot and heavy, make it quick. I wanted to talk to you just real quick about this. You said you got a little bit more information on this topic that we've been going back and forth with during the microdosing movement and stuff. I'll just lay the groundwork real quick. A woman, Doris, was at the SANS conference, and I think it was on life and death. And Paul Stamets was speaking about lion's mane mushrooms, as he does. And he mentioned that the Mycelium of lion's mane really really stimulates neurogenesis, NGF, nerve growth factor. However, it sounded that to some degree, either the lion's mane fruiting body, the mushroom, is either not stimulating or it might even be detrimental. So Ian, I heard you got some follow-up on this, and I just think it's really important information because we've all kind of been indoctrinated to think that lion's mane mushroom is good for your brain, and if that's not the case, then we need to know.
So I believe one of the articles that was being referenced in that statement, because I have heard the words from Paul Stamets' mouth specifically saying that the mycelia tended to take the neurogenesis or increase in neuronal growth factor, NGF, above baseline, meaning baseline being like what everybody would expect to have normally, versus the fruiting bodies would take it below baseline. So in reference to that, there's a paper that was written by a group of scientists. Specifically, the name of it is Neurohealth Properties of Hericium erinaceus, mycelia enriched with erinacines. So Hericium erinaceus is lion's mane mushroom. And erinacines are one of the 3 compounds of interest inside of lion's mane that actually increase NGF. Specifically, erinacine A is the one that we have the most evidence for. And that is actually found in higher quantities inside the mycelia. And actually within the fruit body, there was reported to have none of those compounds present.
Really? None?
And so at this point, it's very important for us to note that because most of us have been focusing on fruit bodies because that's typically what we harvest in the wild. Like if I'm going out into the forest and I'm coming across these things, that was something that I come across that I would harvest and utilize. It's kind of like lobster if you cook it right with butter. But it's one of those very good flavors that it's hard to beat. I'm not a huge mushroom person, but it was one of the ones I enjoyed. That being said, it's like I'm not getting what I thought I was out of it. And same thing with supplements. Most people recommend alcohol extracts of lion's mane mycelia or lion's mane mushroom because that's how you get the more important compounds out. So if you're going to be doing lion's mane supplements, either make sure that they have mycelium in them or the mycelia included, or you're doing alcohol extracts. So that's kind of one of the big takeaways from that.
Right on. Well, okay, so I guess we have one paper, so this is the way science works, right? We want we would love to find some way to repeat that, but ultimately that's where we're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's great information. It got me excited because, I think that that's a really cool thing to be able to teach people to cultivate, because a lot of people aren't going to start a grow up, growing blocks of lion's mane at home, but it's so easy to get a jar of lion's mane mycelium.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives me some inspiration to be like, yeah, okay, well, that I've thought about that before, but you could have a little fungal pharmacy, which is some liquid culture and
Mm-hmm.
some sterilized brown rice in your house. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to maybe bring this to people. And who knows, maybe the best way to get it is to just eat some fresh out of the jar. Who knows?
Honestly, all I know is that there are workout by Paul Stamets himself, specifically looking at, I think it was one of his Fungi Perfecti posts about the benefits of mycelium, specifically looking at reishi and all these other things, and noting one of the more difficult aspects about mycelium is that it tends to be pretty much grown in with whatever substrate it was on, and that can be difficult to separate or to homogenize sometimes, which is, again, why people tend to point to alcohol, like turkey tail extracts and alcohol as well, because it gets a lot of the compounds that we want into a solution that we can ingest better. So thank you, sir. I don't want to spend too much time on one topic because we do have over 35 people here together. I would like to try to get some other questions in here as well. I saw a couple of questions specifically pertaining to, let's see, can I pull up the chat? Yes, I can. Specifically pertaining to what we were just talking about. Wisdom Natural had asked, are we talking about dehydrating the mycelium for encapsulation? And the answer in this instance was very much yes. We were talking about dehydrated ones. Also looking into eating fresh. Like, I'm not so sure eating fresh mycelia is something I can say I've had experience doing, but I imagine cooking a fresh mycelia might be similar to cooking a very tough tofu, I think, maybe.
Yeah,
So,
I've done some experiments with it. The lion's mane mycelium is pretty thin, so it's like you're really just eating the rice or whatever you're growing it on.
okay.
My idea, I hope somebody takes this and runs with it, is to make like, all these oat milks, things like that. Why not grow the lion's mane on oat and then make oat milk with that? I think that would be like the move, because then it's like in an aqueous form. Hey, who knows? It could be.
There's definitely space to be said for utilizing different forms of substrate on which to grow mycelia, on top of the fact that there's something to be said for looking at different organisms too. I actually just recently did a post about psychedelic lichen. So yes, somebody did ask if this is being recorded. I'm going to get a recording of this later and post it on my website, critical.consulting, for people to view later if you guys are interested. We had, so if you guys would like, go ahead and start trying to put some of those questions in the chat. I'll try to catch them as they come through. Myconot420, love the name, it says, do you guys prefer to dehydrate at low temps for longer, higher temps for shorter? I'm a low and slow guy myself. Do you have a preference, Seth?
I haven't, I've heard some things that like you want to dehydrate at 150 degrees because it kind of dismantles a certain enzyme that will like later on, if there's any humidity, will like degrade the mushroom much more quickly and break down the psilocybin more quickly. But these are also just things I hear, so I don't really know. I haven't personally. If you're keeping it dry throughout.
Well, to me, 150 is actually pretty. Actually, I would say that's pretty decently high. And actually, I wouldn't disagree with that in the sense that, yes, critical.consulting. It's a weird website, but it works. But I would not disagree with your assessment. That is actually probably a really good way of doing it. Typically, when I'm dehydrating, I'm typically already working with things that are already somewhat in a dried environment because I'm typically working with dried cakes as well. I actually like to, when I'm growing my own personal use, this is just me personally in my own experience, tend to let it go to drying almost to completion. Like once I actually have the fruit bodies on there, I let everything just dehydrate. And then from there, I'll cut and then dehydrate the mushrooms further. So that works better for me on a low and slow. So explaining process, I guess, is pretty big here too.
Wait, you dehydrate your whole cake?
I don't. I let it dehydrate naturally in a very dry environment. Yep.
Interesting.
Yep. And what that helps me to do is it helps me to guarantee that I'm not actually going to have any infection from anything else right out the gate because I'm literally making sure nothing else is growing on there. It's too dry of an environment.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, 145 for about 6 hours. I think that's probably about, I would say that's pretty decent. I would say probably 5 hours would be decent. 4 to 5 is what I would say, but 6 hours is fine.
Yeah, man. Well, it seems like you're off and running. You're off to the
Yep.
races. So I'm really glad I could jump in here with you for a minute, man. Keep
Yeah,
up the good work. Yeah,
absolutely. I am going to be touching base about some things you might be interested in, so I hope you stick around in the audience.
all right, I'll keep an ear out. Much love, man.
Be
Be
safe,
good.
stay healthy. Anybody else would like to actually hop on and ask a question? I'll gladly take on another guest. So one of the big things about the temperature, somebody was asking about 145 degrees. Seth does make a very solid point that there are a number of different enzymes inside of enzymes being proteins that exist within the organism itself that will actually cause breakdown of psilocybin and silicin in very unhelpful ways. And if you can actually dismantle those through heat, and getting up to a certain temperature allows for what we call denaturing of those proteins or those enzymes. Just based off theory from Pops about drying. Oh, nice. You're sharing a theory that you've learned over time. Again, anecdotal evidence is big in this space right now. That's something that Seth was saying. We had one paper from that what Stamets was making his comment on. And so that's definitely the thing that is needs more fleshing out. One data point is not enough. Things need to withstand the test of time in science in the sense that we can see reproducible data over time. So something that actually I've noticed before, I actually did an article for the San Francisco Psychedelic Society on this, about grinding mushrooms and storing them over long periods of time and testing the potency. There was a work done that I posted again an article on the SFPS's Instagram page for looking at graphs from an article that was trying to understand potency over time. And it specifically noticed a decrease in potency by about 50% within a 2-week window. That is something that I have been utilizing as a reference for a while now and been telling people like in the microdose movement this information readily. However, I will state there's a group that I'm working with in Oakland. Shout out to Oakland Hyphae. They're a group that is working very diligently to try to understand potency of psilocybin mushrooms specifically, and have sponsored a lot of really beneficial science in the space, allowing us to do a lot of important work. One of them, one data point, again, needs more fleshing out. I did take one sample that was homogenized and tested, stored in cracker dry conditions for 2 weeks, and tested again and saw no change in potency. And I did this in what we call triplicate. So I took the sample and I took it into 3 different extracts. And then I also took those 3 extracts, tested those, but I also took 3 different samplings and tested those. There's some important information again about reproducibility and redundancy. And so right now, data is showing that if I grind mushrooms up 2 weeks in, I am not looking like I'm losing potency, according to data that I'm seeing on instruments. However, this needs to be reproduced, and previous data says that after 2 weeks, potency is lost. This incongruity in data is one of the big things that we need to actually look into and get more data about. Specifically with this, it's not strain variants. It was literally the same sample. So it was from, it was one single mushroom from a friend of mine that homogenized, that was over, I think it was about 5.5 grams. And I homogenized the whole mushroom, took 1 gram out, and did an extract of that and tested that extract. Then in triplicate, of course. And then from there, 2 weeks later, took 2 more 1 gram samples, tested those in triplicate, and still saw the same potency. So right now, one of the things that we're looking at is whether or not that paper that was printed is accurate to an understanding of potency over time. Right now, I'm utilizing psilocybin and cilicin standards, so I know the compounds that I'm looking at are present, as well as utilizing high-performance liquid chromatography to answer those questions. So right now, again, this is preliminary data, but this is an important insight into into what it means to actually be able to store these things, because longevity is a big question we all have. I see a question in there. This is a random question. Drying mushrooms right now, and it's really damp in here. There's a lot of things. Moisture is your enemy. Anytime you're working with a living organism that you're trying to produce any type of herbalist or tincture or any type of work, you want to avoid moisture at all costs. So keeping a space as dry as possible and keeping things as cool as possible are usually the best. I stored them in what's called a plastic falcon tube in cracker dry, so I would call it 20 degrees, 20 to 25 degrees centigrade, so room temperature, and low light to no light conditions. Basically sealed inside a box inside of a room that doesn't have traffic in it. So thank you very much, Danielle. I really appreciate that. And again, to answer the potency question, what instruments, high performance liquid chromatography, we're using an HPLC, an Agilent 1100 right now is what we're working with, but we are working with other groups to utilize LCMS as well as other forms. Capillary electrophoresis is another form of analysis we're looking at, as well as I'm working with the San Francisco Psychedelic Society to hopefully put together a home testing kit to help people understand the potency of their own mushrooms. But that's still a little bit of work that needs to happen. And we'll make sure that all the information that we can gets out to you guys, because that's the whole goal of this, is to allow people to educate themselves. So a little bit about who I am, just for you guys, people coming on, because again, we have about 35 people on. Thank you so much for joining us. My name's Ian Bollinger. I am the founding partner and entheogen researcher at Critical.Consulting. Critical Consulting LLC is a California-based research and consulting firm helping people understand how they produce entheogens and how best to utilize them safely. I'm closely tied with the Sacred Garden community in Oakland, as well as work with groups like Oakland Hyphae, SFPS, and other groups internationally to understand entheogens in a more publicly available way instead of sequestering it. So thank you all for coming. Really appreciate your support. Again, trying to get back to questions. So are there dangers of taking psychedelics? The dangers of taking psychedelics are higher than the benefits. The dangers of psychedelics are, I would say, as equal to the benefits, personally, in my experience. But that's, I think, more of a experiential question and less of a science question. I would definitely recommend reading Alexander Sasha Shulgin's books, PCAL and TCAL. Phenethylamines, I have come to know and love, as well as tryptamines I've come to know and love. They're two really good books that have a lot of chemistry, but also have a lot of personal insight into them as well about what utilizing entheogens can look like in small doses and large doses, as well as what to expect with the unknown. It's a very good and helpful tool. Growing mushrooms in any environment. I know a number of people that actually grow mushrooms in Seattle. There are people that actually try to utilize growth chambers. I know Seth has a lot of insight into how to do that. As long as you're able to keep the space that you're working in dry, maybe it be a grow tent or a closet that's very far away, that's definitely a place I would recommend working in as compared to, the entryway where you're going to have, or next to a window or in a bathroom kind of a thing. Because right now, or in a kitchen even, because there's a lot of moisture in kitchens as well. I tend to recommend cleaning a dedicated space when working with mushrooms, just because while moisture is your enemy, you should always consider everything dirty when working with mushrooms, because you're going to be trying to keep everything clean. A lot of thanks coming in. Thank you guys. This is all for you guys. We are definitely doing this to educate. Oh, I got a lot of people in here I know. Hey, friends. Shout out to Mackenzie, my friend Danielle's, all y'all. Thank you so much. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the support of friends and community. Again, everything I do a podcast called Understanding Entheogens, as well as a blog. I'm actually just got done recording the most recent episode of Understanding Entheogens with a Oakland local, Aize Jama Everett. We had a very interesting discussion about historical entheogen use and modern religious practice with entheogens. It's super interesting, but that's a whole other different conversation. As far as science and things like that, it's all a Patreon-supported blog and podcast. So if anybody's interested, we do have a Patreon. It is patreon.com/understanding entheogens. But again, trying to get back to questions, I do not have links to those on my website, but I will gladly make sure those links are available. I will make that in a post when I post this video. I will add TCAL and PCAL posts to that as well. Make a note of that. TCAL and PCAL. So we have a person that speaks about writing and presenting on psychedelics to medical professions. Well, I appreciate that. No, I believe we actually share a common friend in common, Enthea Nurse. I love talking to people about things. I will gladly reach out to you. You can find me at critical.consulting on Instagram. That is definitely a space you can reach out to me as well. But if you reach out through the SFPS, I'm sure they'll help you bridge that gap. Microdosing for my bedridden mom and can't speak. Can anyone help? So I can honestly say that is outside of medical recommendations, and recommendations are not necessarily the space I can necessarily help out with the most. If you provide a location, I know there's a number of professionals out there that maybe might be able to help better connect you. This is just as much a community as anything else. We come together for each other, so if we reach out and try to support each other, hopefully you can get the help you need, but I apologize, I am not that person. What is my experience with different substances impairing different potencies? Oh, substrates impairing different potencies. Sorry, substrates. So different substrates likely do have an impact on potency. Simply speaking, the paper that we brought up earlier about lion's mane, they specifically spiked their substrate with the compound aranacine to make sure that the mushroom has enough of it in there as well. There are instances of people spiking substrate with tryptophan to increase potency, because tryptophan is the amino acid that is the precursor to psilocybin, cilicin, baeocystin, norbaeocystin, aruginacin, norpsilocin, all of these other active tryptamines, even the beta-carbolines like harmine and harmane, the MAOIs that can also be found in mushrooms, all come from tryptophan. So adding tryptophan to substrate can increase potency. However, I am not sure if there are any papers done on like grain or manure or brown rice, adding those things into that space. Most of the research has been done in liquid culture with those. Is there more psilocybin in mycelium or in the fruits? So very good question. I have not personally had the opportunity to do testing on mycelium. So again, I can only speak to research that I've had the opportunity to read. Right now, I did do a post. I can't say that they're significantly different in potency between mushrooms and mycelium, and the fruiting bodies and mycelium. However, I can say that they do contain different things in different quantities. So mycelia contain MAOIs, the beta-carbolines, harmine and harmane, in some species of psilocybe mushroom. And so that being said, they're not typically found in quantifiable amounts or detectable amounts in the fruiting bodies, but they are present in the mycelium. So very much similar to the conversation we were having about lion's mane, how there are compounds that are found in the mycelium that are not found in the fruiting bodies, that these are areas that we need to actually have a better insight into. While there is being research done in this, it is one data point. There is so much more work that needs to be done before we can truly answer those questions. Psilocybin specifically, there is a difference. I believe there is more in mycelium. However, that doesn't mean it's easier to get to, and that doesn't mean it's significant enough to merit wanting to get it out of there. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't something to be said for psilocybe mycelia as a product, because I think there is something to be said for that. The Europeans have been utilizing truffles, or also known as sclerotia, or basically the vegetative mycelial balls, knotted mycelial balls, which actually do contain psilocybin, but the quantities of which I don't know the robust information about. So going through, see if I can't find. What area of scientific research within psychedelics am I most excited about? I think the place that I'm most excited about is really trying to understand the organisms themselves. Because I believe fundamentally, many people have heard me say this before, and I hate to be a broken record, but I really think it's an important statement. Plants, fungi, and fauna, they're the original biochemists. They've been doing this stuff for a long time. Frogs produced what we called venom in all these different compounds to protect themselves. Plants produce these compounds to protect themselves. Fungi produce these compounds to protect themselves. We're learning from them. They are great teachers. So I think the most important thing that we are gaining out of the psychedelic movement is really a better understanding is access to newer, better, and ancient teachers. Turkey meat comparison. Turkey meat, tryptophan in turkey meat is this interesting statement. I think the jury's still out on the whole whether or not turkey meat induces sleep kind of a thing, but most meat are high in tryptophan, and tryptophan is actually the precursor for serotonin and melatonin in our own biology, which is one of the reasons why we need it as a essential amino acid, because we need it to help our body produce serotonin and melatonin regulating sleep, serotonin regulating mood. But that's also the serotonin receptor, or the 5-HT receptor, are what psilocybin acts on, what DMT acts on, what LSD acts on. Those receptors are the same. That's because they have the same, what we call backbone, chemically speaking. I have not done any testing on Acacia confusa yet. However, most of the work I've been doing right now has been with psilocybe. However, I'm excited to be working with a lot of other entheogen. I'm working with a group called the Entheogen Genome Project, or Entheome Project, out of Oaxaca, Mexico. They are an amazing group that's dedicated to sharing and connecting communities that produce and ecosystems that produce entheogens with companies that are actually looking to make reciprocity to communities. So I'm super excited to be working with them. Let's see other questions here. Would taking a source of beta-carbolines with psilocybin mushrooms increase the potency? Are there studies? I would call them anecdotal studies at best. Pseudohuasca or pharmahuasca are sometimes, or psilohuasca, different terms to describe these different things where people take psilocybin mushrooms and pharmaceutical MAOIs, or other entheogens like Syrian Rue, which contains MAOIs and psilocybin. There is something to be said about taking and mixing potencies. It's very dangerous. I mean, there's a reason why your medical professionals typically tell you to wean off of one drug before going on to another, or to even wean off drugs before microdosing. Interactions between these compounds is very extreme, and unless you know very much what you are doing, like Alexander Shulgin, the gentleman that wrote those books I mentioned earlier, PCAL and TCAL, was an expert in this field and definitely understood the process of microdosing pure compounds. What we're tending to be working with as lay people tend to be natural compounds, and understanding those potencies and regulating those appropriately can be very risky, and I typically do not recommend it unless you've done the things individually and understand what those are like individually. And then again, always start low and start slow, but I can never recommend really mixing things because that can really open up a lot of doors of danger. So again, I don't tend to recommend mixing much at all. There are some studies, apparently, yes. Tara Hell, if you'd like to go ahead and share those, not just with the group, I would love to see those as well, because that sounds like an interesting piece that I would love to get a little bit more information and content on. I appreciate you all coming in here. These are some amazing questions. I'm glad to be a part of this. Would you know the source of these 5-MeO and DMT pens, safety, etc.? I don't know the context of that question. I apologize. I can say that most people doing extracts these days are typically working with chemicals that may or may not be high quality, may or may not be food grade, and may or may not contain metals in them, heavy metals in them. Sometimes the cartridges themselves can be contaminated. We've seen issues with that in the cannabis space, where um, black market cartridges don't necessarily contain the constituents that are in there. So always recommend knowing where you're getting things from, and make sure that you have a relationship with whoever. Honestly, having a relationship with the medicine is the best way to do it. Like, don't seek it out of desire just to have them. Seek it out of desire to understand first. I think Lorenzo Haggerty, one of my favorite psychonauts from the Psychedelic Salon, says, when it comes to, he says drugs, I'm going to say entheogens. When it comes to entheogens, it's no, not no. K-N-O-W, not N-O. So please take the time, do your research. If you're getting a DMT pen, know the person you're getting it from. Know if you can get a look at their space. If it looks dirty, if it looks sketchy, probably don't take it. You know, it's leave it up to your own judgment, because in the end, it's your temple. Whatever you're putting into your temple, whatever incense you bring in, that is your decision to make in the end. And be respectful, because it is your temple. The podcast is Understanding Entheogens. That's also the name of the blog. You can find both on the website critical.consulting or through the patreon.com/understanding entheogens. Somebody here is talking about growing themselves but not knowing how. I can guarantee you that there's a number of different resources available to you. Reaching out to people within your community is definitely one of the first steps. Like, making mistakes is the first step to being kind of okay at something. I don't know if you can answer, but how does a newbie find safe purchasing sources? Making friends, like just talking to people within the space and not asking. Don't seek the medicine itself, seek the people to educate yourself. And when in that education, you are likely to come across the sourcing that you need. That's my experience. Don't ask. Just be sure to. It's not helpful to put yourself in that position. I think it's better for you to work with people to understand. And then when you have that understanding, you will likely tend to find the right person and the right time to do those things. Is there an explanation for how the potency of psilocybin alters or changes when in different formats? I apologize. I'm not quite sure, such as grinded or made into tea. So I apologize. Different ingesting formats. Yeah, there is something to be said about psilocybin and cilicin. So psilocybin is not actually the active compound inside your biology. It is actually silicin that is actively engaged in the trip itself, binding to the HT receptors inside your brain, inside your body, that causes those effects. Psilocybin has the phosphate group attached to it. So it is 4-phosphoryl oxy dimethyltryptamine. That phosphate group actually protects it and stabilizes the compound. But when it gets into your body, it passes through your liver, and that phosphate group is removed, and it becomes psilocin. Now, don't get me wrong, psilocin is also existent inside the mushroom, and when you eat it, that psilocin pretty much gets digested, goes into your blood, and just crosses the blood-brain barrier, goes in and starts acting the way it should. That's why it takes time for the trip to actually hit you, is because your body is digesting the psilocybin into the psilocin. And as that ramps, as the psilocin levels increase, so does your trip. So making teas actually tend to, if you're going to make a tea, I never recommend using boiling water. Boiling water can be a little too hot sometimes and actually might destroy the psilocin. Get it to boiling, get it to just below boiling where you have it steaming. Let it steep. Recommend maybe a little bit of lemon. If you do add lemon, what you're doing is a acid digest, because you're having the acidity increase and causing the phosphate ester to get removed. So you're turning the psilocybin into psilocin. So you're increasing the speed at which the psilocin is getting into your body, but also decreasing the length of the experience. So instead of having maybe a 4 to 6 hour trip, if you just ate mushrooms, you might enjoy a 2 to 4 hour trip if you did a tea, if you did the the lemon tea approach. So different approaches do change the chemical constituents, which in turn change the outcome effects. Um, we need to go someplace to learn. I think, thankfully, we have the internet. The internet, we live in the information age. We have the ability to get information from each other, but never trust one source. I am just one person. I'm a stranger most of you all have never met before. Please do the work to educate yourselves. I am a single person, and I have done a lot of work myself. I have talked to and I've held Dennis McKenna's lab notebooks in my hands. I've done numerous different kinds of research in clandestine as well as official lab spaces. I can honestly say that the best resource you have is your own curiosity. Keep that childlike wonder. Thanks, Alice. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you all having me. This has been an amazing conversation. We've actually grown in number of people. I really appreciate all. Let's see. Is there a community page for Texas? I know that the microdosing movement, which is something the SFPS is doing right now, has a number of people based in Texas that are putting together a group. If things come together, I'm pretty sure that community will be available with the SFPS in the near future. Are there testing facilities that we as citizen scientists can send our tinctures to be tested in Canada? Sorrowfully, I cannot speak to that right now. While I do know of people in Canada doing the work, I don't know of anybody accepting anything publicly. However, that is a very good question, and if I know anybody, I'll reach out to the people I do know doing the work and see if there is an answer to that. Public testing. Where can you go to learn, buy, how to grow? There are lots of resources on the internet. I can't list them off the top of my head. I try to recommend people I know locally that instruct people how to grow because they tend to have their finger on the pulse of cultivation more than anything else. Again, not to toot his own horn, Myco Rising Seth has amazing courses I've been glad to be a part of and really awesome instructions on how to do readily available techs. So again, Myco Rising, Seth. I can also recommend resources in the Oakland area. Oakland Hi-Fi, I know, does a lot of work in educating people. The San Francisco, Haight Street Shroom Shop, I believe, also in San Francisco does education. James McConkey out the Haight Street Shroom Shop, shout out James McConkey, also does work out there. Amazing Forager goes out pretty regularly into San Francisco Golden Gate Park and does foraging for tons of different things. But his story is something to behold. I do recommend touching base with him if you're interested in cultivating. I would gladly help you guys put together a class and educate. Trust me when I say education is one of the key components of understanding entheogens. Does non-alcoholic cirrhosis affect potency or anything else of mushrooms? Honestly, that is something that I don't have information on. I actually am not familiar with whether or not destruction of the liver or damage of the liver can affect our ability to do potency. If you do have damage, I would recommend leaning more towards the lemon tech, so you can guarantee that you're getting that transfer from phosphate ester into silicin, from psilocybin into silicin, so you can actually have that effect. So that would probably be, I can't say that there's an issue, but if you feel like there might be an issue, utilizing that alternative method of ingestion might be helpful. So thank you all so much. You guys have been producing some awesome questions. I've been doing my best to feed back. The lemon tech would be the description of doing a tea, utilizing, I would call it above lukewarm or just below boiling water, and adding, once you have done the steep, add a little bit of lemon, like maybe a squeeze of a lemon wedge in there, and that should allow you to, or you can even go so far as, there's another version of the lemon tech, which is literally grinding the mushroom, filling a shot glass with lemon juice, putting the mushroom in there, letting it extract for about 10 minutes and taking the shot. That's more for the psychonaut in people. If you're looking for more of a tea, that's probably the space I would recommend things. I mean, there are crazy ways to ingest, crazy number of different ways to do it, but I guarantee that if you utilize any form of lemon to do a little bit of a digest, 7 to 10 minutes, you no longer, you don't want to let it digest longer because you can tend to destroy the psilocin if you leave it in there with the acid too long. So that's definitely a procedure. Again, lemon tech, TEK, is typically how the terminology is put out there. Tea is typically my favorite form of ingestion. It's a lot more manageable as far as knowing what I'm getting into. I'm going to be seeing, if it was like a roller coaster ride, I would argue that if you're going to be on a long, windy roller coaster, it's a much shorter ride. So something akin to like what you'd see in like an old Woody, compared to what you see nowadays at with like LSD, I think is more like the Batman ride at Universal Studios versus a tea of mushrooms, which tends to be like an old Woody roller coaster that you can have fun on. That's just my personal experience. I will always recommend doing whatever works best for you. If you feel like that you're not getting the experience you're expecting from mushrooms, there is a possibility of potency loss. There are a number of different tests out there that can tell you whether or not you even have potency in something anymore. Testing reagents like Ehrlich's reagent is very acidic. And very, very caustic. I wouldn't recommend utilizing it if you don't have gloves, which most kits come with, in tubes. But all it will typically tell you is whether or not you have tryptamines in there, not how much, or all of those things in there. I do recommend ice water is definitely a method as well. It's a little bit slower because anytime you slow down, anytime you cool something, you tend to slow down the extraction process, but it's definitely a method as well. And you can actually tend to protect a lot more of the constituents that way. So ice water is definitely a method as well. Runs with turtle, good recommendation. I did see somebody reach out with some more questions, so if you guys have more, feel free. I will speak to something that I know a lot of growers have been wondering, and again, shout out to Oakland Hi-Fi, who's helped support doing the science in this space. The questions about caps versus stems is something that I hear a lot. And it's definitely something that has been a major focus as far as getting as much data on it as possible. Statistically speaking, right now, the research that I'm seeing coming off of instruments is there is a difference in caps versus stems. However, there is more of a difference between one mushroom to another mushroom of the same kind than there is between the caps and the stems themselves, which is a weird kind of thing to say, but it boils down to that fundamentally the whole fruiting body is in and of itself variable in potency, likely the stem to be more potent than the cap. However, one mushroom can be completely different potency than another mushroom in the same flush. And this is an important piece of information that's showing up in the data right now. It needs to withstand the test of time before I can assert it officially, but it is something that is tending to show up right now, and it's something I believe is worth sharing. A question about potency. Again, I did touch on that a little bit earlier, but the research that I have before says that after about 2 weeks, you can lose about half your potency if you have a ground mushroom. However, research that I have done in the past month on instrumentation looking at the same sample, homogenized, tested, and then 2 weeks later tested again, sees no difference in potency for that sample. Granted, it has not reached the time in which I can do a month potency yet. I'm still waiting to do that work. I'm looking forward to how that data turns out as well. Is there any quantitative research on binding affinity of various psychedelics and the target receptors in the brain? Yes, there is a number of different work on binding receptors and affinities. I'm actually planning on touching base on those with research in the blog in the near future, and actually trying to get neuroscientists onto the podcast to really talk about that in greater detail, because that's definitely a question that I was not as familiar with as a person that tends to be more of a molecular biologist, looking at the development of these compounds from both a genetic and a cytoplasmic inside the cell kind of perspective. I wasn't really aware of the binding profiles of all of these things until I started understanding the similarities. Again, tryptamines in general include LSD, include DMT, include psilocybin, include beta carbolines, or MAOIs is what we call them. All of those compounds are all in the same class of a family that come from this simple amino acid. And it shows, again, the power of plants, the power of fungi, the power of frogs, and all of these other organisms capable of taking these really, really simple things and creating a myriad of compounds in them. Interestingly enough, one of the more recent papers that I did for my blog was on a lichen that had been known to have psychedelic properties and used by a community of people that were actually not exposed to Western society or modern society until about the mid-1900s. And they specifically had this one lichen, gorgeous colors, aquamarine and like brick burgundy. But this one lichen was known to have psychedelic compounds or psychedelic use indigenously, and was taken and tested multiple times and shown to have tryptamine compounds in it. However, culturally, that culture only had instances of it being used in negative connotations. So there's something to be said about these tryptamine compounds and what the plants and fungi originally used them for, as well as what we as cultures tended to use them for. So being cognizant of what people argue is the anecdotal evidence of indigenous use, I think it's a wealth of knowledge of indigenous practice that we need to acknowledge and recognize and enshrine in the knowledge base that is out there. It needs to be shared more. That kind of insight is important, because if somebody took that lichen, it's like, oh, this can get me high, all of a sudden takes it and has a life-shattering experience, that's dangerous. This is why I always say it's no, not no. So again, paying attention to both indigenous practice and indigenous lessons and our indigenous teachers is very much an important lesson. I got a lot of hellos. Hello! Have you lab tested Lemon Tech on psilocybin levels? Not yet. Technically, yes. So it's arguably an acidic water extract that we have done testing on, and it dramatically increases silicin content and dramatically reduces psilocybin content, but it does not produce for testing reasons, you can get more psilocybin and cilicin if you use a alcohol like methanol or ethanol instead. Little off topic, but I have some contamination pictures I'm wondering. Sorrowfully, I can tell you it's likely trike. Trike comes in a lot of different ways and a lot of different patterns. It's just knowing that something's contamination is trike. And honestly, contamination is par for the course. Sharing pictures of what something is actually what contamination is something that kind of holds things back in a lot of ways. I understand and think there's a necessary need and space for it. However, I do think identifying what something is as contamination right now is, as a grower, kind of sets you back. Focus on learning how to grow better without contamination, in sense that trying to keep a cleaner space. And it likely comes from airborne particles or touching things. So be aware of the surfaces on which you have things. Bleach and ethanol are your friends. Do things in the order of bleach. Actually, I tend to go bleach first, then ethanol. Is typically the way I recommend. Very well ventilated, and don't be afraid to go down to your forearms. Don't be afraid to wear long kitchen rubber gloves, and ethanol those as well. Bleach those as well. Clean those things. Clean things meticulously if you're doing work. Hey, Cynthia, good to see you too. Lots of good friends out here. Absolutely welcome. I'm very thankful. I've got about 14 more minutes on it, so I'll gladly try to hit as many more questions as I can. 41 people. Thank you guys so much. As citric acid, you think orange will work the same as lemon for psilocybin cilicin? I would say so, to a minimal degree. I believe one of the pH differences between orange and lemon are significant, but I have not tested it enough to say, so I can't really speak to it myself. As a citizen scientist, I always recommend a simple test like that to be done as a bioassay, and I would get back to you on that. What are my thoughts, experience on the brand name companies that are coming out now? Um, I believe that fundamentally entheogens represent a liberation of consciousness, and I think that branding and productification of commodification of these things is anathema to the lifestyles that people that use them live in sometimes. So this idea that entheogens in and of themselves open you up to the idea that you don't necessarily need stuff, that you don't necessarily need to be associated with one specific brand. You will find the thing that works best for you. Because you will better understand yourself. You'll better understand your own needs. Entheogens are compounds that are definitely capable of allowing you to better understand the good and the bad in your own life. That's definitely been important lessons that I've learned, and important lessons from people like, again, the books TCAL and PCAL were very influential. They're very powerful because they can help you understand what a bad trip looks like and how a person can integrate it and still go back into that space. It can also help you to understand how to integrate things. But there's something that's more important than a book. There's something that's more important than an internet resource. There's something that's more important than a talking head on an Instagram live, and that is your personal community. Working to find those people and working to build that community is the thing that entheogens fundamentally they're a mortar in that structure. They're going to be more so than you being the cornerstone in your community. It's the mortar that holds things together. Entheogens tend to be some of the more powerful means by which communities got built in historically speaking. The Eleusinian mysteries of Grecian tradition with Demeter and her daughter, I believe it was Persephone, if I recall correctly. Were two of the goddesses that you met in the Eleusinian mysteries, and that was the cause for what created the Greco-Roman state. Like the idea of democracy that we currently live in grew from that. The same things to be said about Soma and the Vedic texts. A lot of the power and the knowledge from there comes from a lot of entheogen communities as well. So I think that there's something to be said for the ability to recognize the communities that are going to come from this. And the Psychedelic Society is definitely one of them. And I'm very thankful to be a part of it and willing to put this together with you all. The books were TCAL and PCAL. Again, those are acronyms. TCAL is tryptamines I have come to know and love, and PCAL is phenethylamines I have come to know and love. They are two scientific books as well as personal entheogenic logs by an entheogenic chemist named Alexander Sasha Shulgin, and collated together by his wife as well, Anne. They're an amazing power couple inside the entheogen space, well remembered in the Bay Area, as well as by most chemists and psychonauts as some of the light bearers during the dark times, during the prohibition that we've all come from. And so there are definitely books that I'll have shared as I put this recording out onto my website, critical.consulting. I'll have the books listed there as references. I'll have the paper about lion's mane that we had talked about earlier referenced. And if I have those papers about binding profiles that was asked for, I will have those posted as well there. How do we reconcile the prescribed nature of these medicines with the urge to build an entheogenic community? Ooh, interesting. How do we forge bravely? That's a social question, and as a person that is deeply philosophical and loves those ethical and social construct questions, I think that's a very, again, beautiful question. Answering that in this space, I'm going to try to be concise because I really could go into that for another hour. I think the most important thing that we need to do is what we've done so far in Oakland, which is decriminalize, because that means that it's not legalized. That means big companies aren't likely going to be moving in and trying to move into this space. But people who want the medicine, who need the medicine, who seek the medicine, who want the community, who seek the community, who build the community, are going to have the freedom to do so without the fear of having some corporate entity come in and take over a space. So there is a little bit more freedom right now in the decriminalization space. It's a lot more Wild West, gray market kind of a thing than it is anything else. And I think that's likely the bubble or the container that's going to help us succeed the best right now, personally. Clinical trials on anxiety and psilocybin. There are a couple of Canadian trials. I will get those listed as well. Anxiety and psilocybin. I will have those posted on the website as well. Binding profiles. Because I do know of some groups, I believe in Canada as well, as I think Harvard and Johns Hopkins doing that well. Binding. Oh, thank you, Cynthia, putting those titles in. Psychedelic companies to invest in. I typically don't tend to make those recommendations, mostly because I can't necessarily. I don't think I have. Every opinion is biased, in my opinion. Humbly speaking, every opinion is going to be biased, and I have my own personal opinions about companies and individuals. Those are two different things. I can respect a person, but not respect their company, and vice versa. So I don't necessarily want to bring those complications into the space, and I would recommend that you reach out to people that you think resonate with you. That's what I've been doing. The Entheum Project, the SFPS, Oakland Hi-Fi, all of these different groups, the Sacred Garden community, all of them have been groups that I've reached out to and have built relationships with and built community with. And I believe it was a Dutch comedian that said, never go into business with somebody you're not willing to hug. And I think that's an important lesson to learn. Like, if you don't have a community with a person, you shouldn't be going into business with them. And investing is going into business with somebody in a weird kind of esoteric way. Syrian Rue, I would say yes, it is entheogenic. It contains beta-carbolines. Interestingly enough, one of my favorite reactions, chemically speaking, is Syrian Rue and water. Do I have any water? No, I do not. Darn. I actually have the ability to do that reaction live. I just don't think I have the water to do it. I could go grab a water right quick. But the idea being is that if you have 365 nanometer light, you can actually show the entheogen compounds within Syrian Rue. So you take the seeds, you place them in water, and then you shine the light, and it actually turns the water into a neon light green. And that is from the beta-carbolines present inside. Beta-carbolines have a 3-ring structure. And that 3-ring structure tied together, it's like a kind of like a snowman with a weird Siamese twin snowman fused at the head. That's a weird description, but that's kind of the ring structure. The idea being that when light hits the ring structure, it actually the energy bounces around a little bit and actually bounces out at a different frequency than when it went in at. And that's why you can send a UV light at it and it comes back, an ultraviolet light, and it comes back visible, is because the energy is being bounced around within the compound structure and coming back a different way. So that UV visualization is one of the positive tests for the entheogenic compounds in Syrian Rue. I am unfamiliar with the combustion of Syrian Rue. I'm mostly familiar with the ingestion of it. However, the tryptamines inside, again, beta-carbolines are tryptamines, and tryptamines do vaporize. I don't know the vapor temperature of beta-carbolines off the top of my head, but I assume it'd probably be a higher one than that of like DMT, due to the 3-ring structure stabilizing it. So I would probably say that it is smokable, but probably not at temperatures that would be pleasant. Do you have much experience with morning glory seeds? A special Erling alkaloid? Yes, I am very familiar with LSA. LSA is actually one of those things that I was specifically on Morning Glory seeds. I was unfamiliar with the source of LSA being an endosymbiotic fungus inside the seed of Morning Glory seeds that actually travels seed to seed, plant to plant, generation to generation. It lives inside. It can't live outside of the Morning Glory plant. And it actually protects the Morning Glory from infection from soil nematodes, and amongst other things. But LSA is a very interesting compound. It actually is one of the more interesting tryptamines in my experience, because I find it to be a lot nicer. Just like, I guess, the difference between like MDA and MDMA. MDA is typically found on the street as Sally, and MDMA is typically found as Molly. Molly tends to be a lot more high energy. Sally tends to be a lot more chill energy. I think LSA and LSD are very similar in that case. Like, LSD is a lot more high energy. LSD is a lot more relaxed, that warm hello that you speak of. Getting off Zoloft and microdosing. I can't honestly speak to getting off of Zoloft. I can honestly say working with whatever person prescribed you those things is important. The regime to get off of antidepressants is not easy, but I can say microdosing does have a dramatic increase on depression. I mean, dramatic effect on depression, in the sense that you are decreasing its effect on you, increasing your happiness. I'm actually getting close to the last minute on here. I would like to, again, thank you all for coming. It's probably going to kick me off here momentarily. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you, Seth, for coming on and starting it. Thank you, everybody, for coming on and enjoying and engaging in conversation. I hope this has been helpful. This has been really awesome for the SFPS to put on. Again, I'm Ian Bollinger. You can find me at critical.consulting on Instagram, or the website critical.consulting. You can find the blog there, as well as our Patreon, patreon.com / understanding entheogens. I should be having a new podcast coming out this Sunday. I have 3 already recorded. We do them every other week, and I do a blog post on a scientific article every week, and I'll be working with the SFPS. You'll see me around. We look forward to educating everybody in a meaningful way. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this. This has been so much fun. Yes, let's do it again.